This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
Bismillah walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So I thought that since some of us have started fasting, we could talk about fasting a little bit, but from the standpoint of maybe from a different frame than how typically it gets discussed. So right now, Maghrib is super early, right? Fajr is also very early, but the days are much shorter. So as a time to adopt like a regular fast, it's a really ideal time of the year to build a relationship with it as a practice. For those of you who have fasted, I know some of you guys have fasted. In our tradition, anybody who is serious about their spiritual growth and increase, they would normally adopt a regular fast. That's because so much of our spirituality in and of itself is attached to what it is that we consume. And consumption, not just limited to physical, like food consumption, what you're eating, what you're drinking, but also what you're seeing and what you're hearing, right? All of your sensory perceptions. And the idea is that what is outward has an impact on what is inward. So we have a vehicle that is a very inactive action, so to speak, right? Because fasting is not the same as prayer. There's a lot more Muslims who fast than pray, because you could essentially sit in a room all day and just not eat or drink, and you fasted as per the legal requirements of our tradition, right? There's not so much that goes into doing it. It's about not doing something. But it has now a transformational aspect that renders inward change, right? And this is what the verse says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, that it's been written for you. And the verse is prefaced by, O people of faith, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, fasting has been written for you as it was written for those who came before you, so that you could attain taqwa, right? And for this conversation, we're not going to get into what's the nuance of taqwa. It's just about mindfulness and consciousness, presence, awareness. You are not in a default setting where you're running and not acutely aware of what's going on around you. I want to introduce a couple of terms before we start looking at this more foundationally. There's a concept in our tradition that's called the qaswatul qalb. Does anybody know what this is or have heard of it before? No. So the qaswatul qalb is the hardness of the heart. It's not like a physical hardness of the heart necessarily, but it's talking about a spiritual hardness of the heart, right? And that spiritual hardness of the heart can render now impact, because the heart becomes the seat of pretty much everything in our beings. So your heart is a place that essentially the hadith says if it's good, then everything else is going to be good. If it's not good, then everything else is not going to be good. And we've talked about this in a lot of detail in other sessions, where in an Islamic psychology of the self, the placement of the heart in relation to the ego, to the mind, the intellect, etc. And so the hardening of the spiritual heart, the qaswatul qalb, there's a spiritual master in our tradition by the name of Dhanun al-Misri, rahimahullah. He lived at a time where there was that much more growth now to the spiritual development of Islam. So you're talking about late 700s, early 800s, came from Upper Egypt. He was also somebody who's identified as Nubian. He was a black man. And that's an important thing to understand, because there's such a deep legacy within our tradition that incorporates now racial diversity in ways that kind of get left out, because this man is from Upper Egypt. And our assumption can be, well, maybe he is Arab, but he's not. Dhanun al-Misri has numerous texts that he's authored about religion, spirituality. It's quite often quoted. When he talks about the hardness of the heart, He says, إِذَا رَدْتَ أَن تَذْهَبَ قَسَاوَةُ قَلْبِكَ, if you want the hardness of your heart to leave, the first advice he gives, he says, فَأَدْمِ الصِّيَامِ, then endure in fasting. And right off the bat, it becomes a recommendation for people across the board. Why do you think that is? In your own experiences with it. And as some of us might not be able to fast physically, so we want to think about it just in terms of consumption on a whole, right? But when you have fasted, you have experienced it, whether it's Ramadan or not, why do you think it's such a critical component to the development of one's inward state? The idea of keeping in check what it is that you're putting into your body. Does the question make sense? Yeah? Okay, do this so we can get people talking to each other. Just talk to the person next to you, right? You can talk across too, and however, why do you think fasting is something that's so emphasized in one's spiritual diet? And then we'll come back and discuss. I want you to think about what's happening though on a process level, right? You don't exist in a vacuum, but all of you is connected to the rest of you. So the same way you have parts to yourself that impact the rest of you physically, your physical self also impacts your spiritual self. And so there is a direct relation proportionally to your consumption and your spirituality. And in a society that's heavily delineated now, if we were to put it into two categories, you can be a consumer or a contributor. It doesn't mean you're only one or the other, absolutely, but these are roles that people are taking, right? You're either taking or you're giving. You can't simultaneously give and take. And there's an overt emphasis within the part of the world we live in to engage in a lot of overabundance, right? So right now in the pandemic, supply chains are running low. People are writing all kinds of articles as to how in the United States, there's going to be a mode and shift towards the way the rest of the world works, because the United States builds itself off of overabundance, right? People have too many clothes. People have too much in terms of material possessions. People have jumped from a place, for example, where like 10, 20 years ago, a good number of people didn't even have a TV in their house. And now people who have an average income of like $40,000 a year have 3 televisions in their house, right? That's not necessarily a sign of success. It's a sign of what's really defining and dictating how people consume. And fasting as a practice is telling us that you got to keep your consumption in check, because your body is something that's important, but it's not the only thing that makes you you. And it can become really easy now to be somebody who is only about food, who is only about drink, who is only about sleep, who is only about sex. And you are governed primarily by the physicality of situations. And where you don't now have an understanding of the relationship between how the physical impacts the metaphysical. So that act is rendering increase in your celestial self. And what dilutes and desensitizes your inward state is also going to be a product of what you're putting into your body, right? If you eat like gross food all the time, it's going to literally kill your physical heart. May Allah protect us from it, right? Because I don't know about you, but I'm from a brown family. I got a lot of aunts and uncles and family friends who, as they get older, obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, every other thing that you can think of. And it's just ingrained within to the actual consumption diet, right? And there's not thoughts about, well, what's ahead? And people are not paying attention to what's going on with their physical inside. They're not thinking, right? Like, what is this doing to my physical organs, my physical body? they're definitely probably not thinking then, what's it doing to my spiritual inside? What's it doing to my spiritual body? You see what I mean? The act of fasting in and of itself, and I'm going to say this to all of you, right? Because I didn't grow up very Muslim. And I still remember when I first started fasting, like regularly, I was in 5th grade. And the act in and of itself was a little bit easier because I had one other classmate who was my best friend, even till now. We know each other since we were babies, but there was no other Muslims in our school. He was fasting. It made it a little bit easier. So I wasn't the only one that wasn't going to a lunchroom, and I wasn't the only one doing this. There was 2 of us. It can be hard when you're kind of the only one doing something. But it was also one of the few religious acts that I was actually excited about doing. Whereas like through a lot of my teens and early on, I struggled with praying my prayers, but for some reason, I was always excited to fast. And the discrepancy in my motivation, I think, could be rooted in a lot of things subjectively, but fundamentally, there's a unique mercy in the fact that this is an act that can appeal to so many people, right? And Allah tells us that the reward for it is directly with him, right? Fasting is for me, he says. When you are thinking about this now, and I'm going to say this to you, I know that there's a lot of people who cannot fast. And they can't fast because of physical health reasons. They can't fast because of mental wellness conditions. They can't fast if, it's hard for them in pregnancy or nursing or whatever else, right? And you want to think about those people. Here, if you have the ability to fast, you should start fasting right now in the winter when the days are short here in New York. And you want to start building it as a regular practice. It's a practice. It's going to take time to get to the place where spirituality is going to be impacted, because you have to get used to the physicality first. It's not the same as the fast of Ramadan, because in Ramadan, the shayateen are chained, right? فتحت أبواب الجنة وغلقت أبواب النار وصفدت الشياطين. The hadith says the gates of Jannah are open, the gates of Jahannam are closed, and the shayateen are chained. So here, you don't have your family waking you up for suhoor. You don't necessarily have 1,000 people that are all reading and praying and doing all kinds of things every night. It's going to be a distinct, individualized act. You can create now practice around it, right? We went like 6 of us and had iftar last Monday. I think today there was maybe like 10 of us. Last Thursday, there was like 20 of us, right? There's no reason why. You can't all say, hey, we're going to have a regular fast. We're all just going to go to a dining hall together. The same hadith are applicable outside of Ramadan, right? Like somebody swiped me today. Tariq swiped me today for my meal, right? I'm a grimy 39-year-old man, got a freshman kid swiping me in a dining hall for food. That's fine. One of the things you all don't know is that pre-COVID, freshmen were super friendly with upperclassmen because every upperclassman was taking meal swipes from all of you. I don't know why that stopped, but you have to reinstate that as a practice. As you get older, you're going to take younger kids' swipes. You're not a senior, are you?
I gotta start taking off.
Yeah, there you go, man. The hadith is still true, right? You feed a fasting person, there's deep ajr in that. You should want to be feeding people. The dua of the fasting person is accepted when they break their fast. It's still the same. So the opportunity to yield those things at a time when less people are doing it creates now more of an opening for inward growth, because you're not doing it when 1,000 other people are doing it in your local community, or like millions of people are doing it around the world. You're doing it when it's more singularized. And that's where you want to jump on, right? Some of you don't even wake up till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm not trying to be funny, right? I know that you do not. That means you would fast for 3 hours. Do you understand? You could still pray Dhuhr on time and Fajr on time, and you could pray Asr and Maghrib and break your fast, and you're awake for 3 hours of the fast. Why would you not do it? And you become now a distinct link in the chain of movement forward. My kids, they're going to see me fasting on different days of the week. My parents, right, may Allah grant them healing, they started fasting after I started fasting Sunnah fasts as an undergrad. There's opportunity for distinct interjection into people's lives. You don't know who it is that you're going to impact. Some of the other distinctions. When you're doing a recommended fast, a Sunnah fast, you have until Dhuhr time to make the intention for fasting. Does that make sense? So a Fard fast is not like that. You're fasting in Ramadan, you make the intention before Fajr. You can make like a blanket intention for the month. Your action denotes intention. We don't have to get into that. But say, for example, Nawab, mashallah, wakes up at 12 o'clock, or Dhuhr is at 11:40. It's 11:30. He gets up. He hasn't eaten anything or drank anything. He can intend to fast for the rest of that day. You can make the intention from the night before. It's the same way it works in Ramadan. If you don't have suhoor, it's okay. There's barakah in it. If you can get up and drink some water, great. Even in a sip, the Prophet says there's blessing. You want to eat a meal before? I can't tell you what to eat or not to eat in specific. Don't eat gross things. Use it also as a time. We'll talk about this in a bit, so I won't say it now. But the same blessings in the practice in Ramadan, they're arguably that much more because you're doing it now, not only out of obligation, but you're doing it because you want to. And there's a distinct maturation in your spiritual growth because you're approaching now your spirituality beyond just the confines of obligation. And as you start to build a relationship with it, as the time of day is shorter, as the minutes add on in the other direction, it's going to be a little bit more easy. And you start to see now the benefits of it in different ways. Yeah.
If we wanted to fast and Maghrib is during a class, how would we go on about that?
All you got to do to break your fast is to sip some water, eat a date, right? You take it with you in class, right? Essentially, if anything enters into your mouth, nasal cavity, goes, whatever it is, you can break your fast on that. Do you know what I mean? Technically, and you shouldn't do this, but you should know your fiqh. If I swallow my spit in my mouth, that does not break my fast, right? If I spit in my hand and then I drink the spit from it, it breaks my fast. Do you see the distinction? Plan a little bit better so you don't have to drink your spit, but you fundamentally don't need a lot to break a fast, right? And because the hour of the days are so short right now, you can likely still get through a class, have presence, and you're building a relationship as you're detoxing from coffees and other stuff, and you do it over the course of the year. We have recommended fasts. The Prophet ﷺ would fast the middle days of the month, the white days, when the moon was at its fullest, right? The 13th, 14th, 15th of the month. There's hadith where the companion comes and asks the Prophet ﷺ about fasting outside of Ramadan. He says, fast the middle days. He said, I can do more than that. He says, then fast on Mondays and Thursdays. These are days in our tradition that have distinction. The Prophet ﷺ, about Monday, he said, Dhaka yawma wulidtu fi, that was the day that I was born, right? And he fasted on that day out of recognition of his birth. It's in the hadith. You can literally go to Mecca and Medina, and they have museums about the Prophet, and there on the wall it's written, he fasted on this day that he was born. Those days are also, we're taught, the days that your deeds are reported by the angels. So the Prophet liked to be, alayhi salam, in a more purified state on those days. The companion said, I can do more than that, more than Mondays and Thursdays. And so the Prophet alayhi salam says to him that fast every other day, as was the sunnah of the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam, but don't do more than that. That companion says towards the end of his life, I wish I had taken the advice of the Prophet and done one of the lesser fasts. There's a few things you want to pull from this. One, the Prophet's not starting with the greater number of days and then working his way down to the lesser number of days. But he goes from 3 days out of the month to 8 days out of the month to 15 days of the month, because ours is not a tradition that's about quantified, but qualified. Not how much you do, but how you do what you do. So you're not in competition with anybody else, right? The person you are today is just trying to meet the person you can become tomorrow. So you work your way at a pace that makes sense for you. Make sense so far? The second thing is that companion, he stuck with the practice. He adopted it. He said later, I wish I had done one of the lesser ones, but he still kept it up. You know what I mean? Allah loves acts that are consistent, is what we're taught. So we have a hadith where the Prophet is asked for advice, and he says, Ya Abdullah, to the companion, O Abdullah, La takun mithl fulan, kana yaqumu layl wa taraka qiyamu layl. That don't be like so-and-so and such, kana yaqumu layl. They used to stand in the night for prayer. When you have the word kana in Arabic, along with a verb, it's denoting that there was continuity to the action. It was done regularly. It wasn't done just once, right? So it wasn't that they just prayed one time in the night. Kana yaqumu layl meant that they were consistently standing for the night prayer. Wataraka qiyamu layl, and then they abandoned the standing in the night, right? So make an intention. Just try your best. But you got to start somewhere. So if you can do just one day out of the month, a couple of days in the month, do what it is that makes sense for you. You have fiqh opinions in our tradition that it's permissible to fast every day of the year other than the days that it's haram to fast, like the days of Eid. And people base this off of a lot of things, right? Like if you do like really crazy stuff, sometimes the expiation for it is you got to fast like 2 months in a row straight. So people would say, well, if I have to fast 60 days in a row because I have to make up for this wrong thing that I did, I can't do something that's haram in order to compensate for a mistake that I made. Does that make sense? So if you weren't allowed to fast every day consistently, it wouldn't be a means for expiation for something. Do you get what I'm saying? I'm not saying you should fast every single day. I'm also not saying you should fast only in a certain adaptation of it. I'm saying that you want to start to fast outside of Ramadan. It's going to be something that early on you might feel tired, you might get headaches, this and that, but build practice around it. You know what I mean? And you start to expand the circles, right? You invite more people in. It doesn't have to be, something that dilutes the experience, but it's the idea. You adopt a practice, you teach others, there's gain in it for you and gain in it for them as you're giving it to them more. Does that make sense? Okay. Now you want to think about this from the standpoint of what you eat. We have a hadith that says, At-tuhuru shatr al-iman, that purification is half of your faith, right? A lot of times when we think of tahara, we think about it in terms of physical cleanliness. Does anybody know Surah Al-Mudathir? Ya ayyuha al-mudathir. Anybody know the surah? Anybody heard it before? Yeah. Do you know how it goes? Ya ayyuhal mudaththir. Anybody? So there's three verses that are the first verses revealed to the Prophet alayhi salam. The first, Iqra, Bismi Rabbika alladhi khalaq, read in the name of your Lord, right? People have probably heard this, the angel Jibrail in the cave of Hira. Then there's a different opinion on what comes next. Ya ayyuhal muzammil, qum al-layla ila qalila, or Ya ayyuhal mudaththir, qum fa'anzir. That, O mudaththir, like stand and warn, O muzammil, pray into the night even a little bit. In Surah Al-Mudaththir, as the surah continues, there's a verse that says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, that, and your clothes, like purify them. The same word as at-tahur shatr al-iman, that purification is a part of your faith. So tahara, in and of itself, is understood as like physical cleanliness. That's one interpretation of this verse. The Prophet ﷺ is saying, is being told, like, make sure your clothes are clean, right? And it's a big part of it. Your wudu is a big part of it. Like the clothes you wear, it's a big part of it. A second interpretation of this by a mufassir of our religion, somebody who does tafsir, Quranic commentary, his name is Ibn Juzay. He says, secondly, that it could mean something that's more kind of metaphorical, that essentially the person is being told, like, keep your clothes clean, meaning like, don't do bad things, don't fall into sin. But third, for what we're talking about today, he says that the word tahara is in reference to like the ethics of the clothing. You know, like, was this made in a sweatshop? Was the person who made the clothes paid like beyond like poverty level wages? Did somebody have to have things stolen from them in order for it to reach you? Like the supply chain, does it go well? And so with food, it's the same idea, right? Inna Allah ta'ala tayyib la yaqbal illa tayyib. That indeed Allah Azawajal is tayyib, he's pure. He accepts only that which is pure. So you want to firstly eat like things that are good. You're going to fast all day, which you should. Even if you don't fast, you got to stop putting garbage into your bodies. It literally fuels your bodies. You want to ensure that what you're putting into your body from a quantity standpoint and a quality standpoint is rooted in what is tayyib. And that's not just eating what is halal, right? I had a brother who was here in the summer, I won't say who it is in case he doesn't want me to, that showed me a video of people doing the udhiyah, the qurbani for Eid al-Adha, the slaughter of the animal. And there was literally a guy in a pair of like cut off jean shorts, no shirt, white guy, had like headphones on his head, had a rifle in his hand. And there's all these like brown people around him, and he's shooting the cow from a distance. They'd shoot the cow and then go slaughter his neck. The guy was like, is this okay? I'm like, hell no, it's not okay. What do you mean?
Oh my God.
The Prophet used to reprimand companions who would simply be sharpening the blade that they were going to slaughter the animal that they were about to eat in front of the animal, and would say, why are you torturing this beast? Umar radiallahu anhu on one occasion sees a man and he has his foot on the face of the animal that he's about to slaughter to consume it. And Umar starts to beat the man, saying, why aren't you giving this animal its right? And so you think about tahara in this sense. Heavily processed foods, things that are constantly and consistently loaded with all kinds of garbage, that's one aspect to it. But like the foods that you're eating, they're not made with hands that are attached to people that love you. They're without blessing and barakah then. When you don't eat together, when you don't share meals, when you're letting people also eat alone, You're taking away from metaphysical gain and blessing. You want to make sure that you're not fueling your body through the iniquitous practice of any system or any industry, right? So you're putting like good quality foods in it. And just think about this, okay? If you were to write down what you have and have not eaten in the last month of your life, you think about just your physical health, your wellness, your emotional health, your emotional wellness. It's not categorically across the board only attributed to it, but it's a big part of it. And so you start to think mindfully, right? I don't need to be like overdosing on caffeine when I'm 19, 20 years old. I couldn't tell you how much you should eat, but each of you has to see how you relate to food and impact the relationship you have with food, because it can be very easy to lose sight of it and develop habits then that might not seem to be so impactful at a certain age, but they start to catch up to you later on down the line, right? We're the only animals in God's creation who, even after our stomachs are full, we still keep eating. Doesn't make any sense. The hadith says 1/3 food, 1/3 water, 1/3 air, which means that you don't eat so much food, but also you should be drinking as much water as you're eating food. And there's benefit to that. The Prophet didn't eat so much meat. There's a hadith in the Muwatta of Imam Malik where Umar radiallahu anh, he says, be wary of the consumption of red meat. It has the addictive characteristics of alcohol. You don't want to eat a lot of beef. You don't want to eat a lot of lamb. I just have a butchery in the East Village, organic, fresh, grass-fed, hand-slaughtered. It's not like mass-produced stuff. You talk about ethics of animal treatment. When we first started, found butchers that were doing like gross things. It was like crazy gross, like what they were doing to this meat. And that's after it's in their stores. There was practices taking place outside of the halal industry where, for example, goat milk became really popular amongst like hipsters, right? Everybody said they want to drink goat milk, you know? Like, come on, huh? Yeah, dad's hipster. Yeah. What these guys were doing was because it was such a high margin commodity, they were killing baby goats so that the goats could not drink their mother's milk because they wanted to sell the milk. And they weren't even doing anything with the baby goats. They just killed them and then that was it. That's crazy. And so you think about, in order for me to drink that goat milk, these animals are going through what? Right? I went for Hajj and a guy met me in the hotel because he had heard that I own Honest Chops. And he was like, you know, I'm responsible for a lot of the slaughtering of the animals here, like millions of animals. And I was like, hey, man, I don't know what you've heard. My store is like the size of a closet in the basement of a building. It's not really that serious, you know? And he's telling me, and I'm asking him, I'm like, how do you like slaughter every animal with the name of the Haji who is slaughtering? He's like, we don't. I said, oh, that's okay, great. And I said, what do you do with all this meat? And he said, man, there's days in Mecca where the carcasses of cows just sit on the streets. It's like, what? How's that possible? This is like a prophetic practice that transcends generations of prophets. And it's turned now into this commodified industry that has no idea present within it that on the day of judgment, goat that has no horns has recompense against the goat that has horns. What are these animals going to say? And then you eat it is the problem. I saw chickens who were so pumped with hormones and steroids that their legs cannot hold their weight, so they sit their entire lives. And when you lift them up, there's no feathers underneath them because they're just sitting in the same spot. And that's where they're eating. That's where they're going to the bathroom. That's where everything is happening. That cow that got shot in the head, the fear that's going through it is sending all kinds of things that are going to carry forward in its muscles. You're going to eat that, and it's going to impact you. Why I would eat at Lipton over any other place is because I know the guys who supervise that in their supply chain, and they're making sure that none of that stuff is going into anybody's body. But do you see what I'm saying to you? In Allah Ta'ala, tayyib la yaqbal illa tayyib. It's not just about it tastes a certain way, but it's about thinking, well, what are these other consequences and implications that come into play? There's also a lot of privilege that goes into this as a conversation. So you have to assess it based off of your individual circumstance. I'll use my store as an example. It costs more than regular meat. People say to me, what are we supposed to do? I say to them, well, one, you shouldn't eat that much meat to begin with. But two, we're trying to work it down so that the pricing is able to now be accessible to the masses, right? And that's where the industries also become important to understand. There's a reason why certain neighborhoods don't have supermarkets in them, but they have tons of alcohol stores. They have a lot of fast food, $3, $4 sandwiches. And it impacts now the health of minority populations and lower income demographics. It's done purposefully. And so thinking about this on the individual level, as you start to fast, you also just start to think about what is it that I'm eating and how do I understand the ethics of it, the quality, the quantity, so I'm rebuilding my relationship with food. I'm going to pause for a minute. I'd love to hear what some of you think in response to this. Where is it taking you? Anything, any comments, any questions? Yeah.
Well, one, like what you just said about like how in certain neighborhoods where a lot of minorities, usually that's like called like a fast food desert. That's like what it's termed, where it's like you don't see a lot of supermarkets, you don't see a lot of like, places where you can get groceries. And then another thing is like with my family, we've actually stopped eating a lot of red meat, and like a lot of our diet nowadays, it's like mostly like beans or vegetables, cauliflower, it's a big one, carrots, potatoes. That's like a lot of what our diet is, because we know like in our family that we have like, yeah, the same thing, like obesity, diabetes, all that. And like also we know like it's just not good to like, be consuming so much of that when half the time it's like it's going to waste.
Yeah. Do you feel better? Do you see a difference in eating more like plant-based stuff?
Yeah. And it's like, I enjoy eating vegetables actually. Like it's not something this is what we're eating tonight. Like it's something that's like kind of like since I was a kid that was like emphasized like in our household. Like we should be eating vegetables. We should be eating less meat, even less rice. That's like something that I've kind of like it's like a good habit of mine at this point in my life.
And it's going to be hard, right? So you make just subtle changes and subtle practices, and you're thinking now in moderation. Your body needs different things. And as you're moving forward, the habits you have now, like when you're 50 years from now, Allah knows best, that version of yourself is going to either be hating who you are today, or is going to be grateful for who you are today based off of what it is that you're setting it up for, right? Other thoughts, like what does it make you think about? Where is it taking you to?
As a kid, I remember like, so my dad would take me to the slaughters.
There's a Muslim student here in 2007. His name is Muhammad Rustam. He started a program that was called Two Birds, One Stone. And he was an undergrad. This kid graduated when he was 19, finished his undergrad in 2.5 years. He worked full-time, I think, at Goldman Sachs while he was doing his undergrad. He's a really great guy. He got married like right out of undergrad to a girl who was also an undergrad. He was living life really well, man. But he saw what you said and he said, how do I remedy this? How do I fix it? And he found other students who helped him to build that as a project. They would take the food that was being thrown away at the dining halls and they would then get that donated. Another girl who was an undergrad here, her name is Hana Deradunwala. She graduated a few years after that, and she started to do this with like student clubs on campus and departments. You have leftover food at an event, I'll come and take it. And she was featured in numerous media periodicals, does this now citywide. Why I'm saying this is like, it's not something that has to happen 20 years from now, right? You see something in front of you, you take people around you and you're like, hey, what do we do to remedy this? But a starting point comes from consciousness, right? That you start to be aware and everybody's seeing it get thrown away, but you see it differently. And there's a shift in the paradigm. And what can contribute to that paradigm shift is fasting as a practice. It's meant to be transformational in terms of how you perceive things, right? So it's not just about like physical wellness and other types of wellness and these things, but it also now impacts the heart. And the heart has vision, what we call basira. And it starts to have you see what you see normally, but you see it in a different way, right? The solution is not like to elevate yourself by denigrating somebody. Man, I'm going to lick my plate keen and all you like terrible Muslims and all these people, look at you throwing your food away. No, like the Prophet didn't hate on people, right? He helped them to see what was inherently good within them. I had a teacher who, someone asked, like, should you overeat or throw food away? He said, throw it away. And they said, why? He's like, I mean, the bugs will at least eat it in the garbage dump or the rodents, right? But he's not hating on the person, as a mode of weaponizing religion, He's going to the place where he's making justifications. It can be both and. It doesn't have to be either or. But the consciousness is going to be recognized through like your vision subjectively. Why do I see it in this way? You see what I mean? And I'm telling you, if you have the physical capacity to fast, you should start fasting right now when the days are shorter and build a relationship with it so that it starts to influence and impact your overall consumption. Your older self is going to love your younger self as a result of it. Yeah, we get heavily influenced by like the people around us, the situations that we have around us. Emotions heavily define like our scheduling, some of our habits. But when you're in a place now where you can isolate and you start to reflect and you enact change, it can be gradual and it's a process, but you take it step by step and there can be progression to it, right? So I'd say step one is just think about your relationship to what you consume and you can deepen it. Like you were saying before, Ahmed, like it's not just about food and drink, right? You can have fasts that are of a lot of different things. Fundamentally, our fast is about like not eating, not drinking, not consuming, no sexual activity during the daylight hours. That's what the fast as a practice is. It's a time-tested spiritual vehicle that the verse alludes to preceding even our religious tradition, right? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. It's for you. It was for those that came before you, right? It's been there for centuries. God made it in this way where the doing of it will yield this act, this consequent, this gain, right, of consciousness. But you do it in the way that it is. And you start to then enhance it and add it. So my fast will be of complaining. My fast will be from gossiping. My fast will be from thinking poorly of others or thinking that I'm better than somebody else, right? My fast is going to be of all these things. Outside of it, what I'm seeing impacts my heart. What I'm hearing impacts my heart. So if I'm watching consistent violence gratuitous violence, heavily hypersexualized things, right? I'm literally putting this in through sensory perception and it's coming back here. An entry point, what we call an opening spiritually, can come from fasting as a practice, that it allows for me now to start to reflect on it for myself individually. Yeah, and you bringing routine to your schedule. So it starts to regulate like a lot of other things that are going on in your day, in your week, in your month. You start to regain time, right? And what Manal just said, I think, is an important last point that I want to bring up. People have comments and things, you know, we can do that and then wrap up for today. You want to see how you relate to different types of food and what it is that it's doing to you in specific. And if you know that there's something that's not good, like giving yourself the time to detox properly, right? Like Amira, who most of you probably met, she's our associate director. Like years ago, I saw in Ramadan, our typical Ramadan here at the IC, we're feeding like 1,000 people a night. We're doing qiyams like regularly. There's a lot of activity going on. We're raising money for various charity causes and things. And I don't sleep like at all in Ramadan. And what I noticed one Ramadan, we typically have a lot of people in our community. May Allah allow for us to come together again soon, inshallah. We have a lot of people who, you know, in Ramadan, they're like baking stuff for some of our charity campaigns. We do bake sales at iftar every night. And there's one night somebody made like these lemon bars. I forget what they're called, right? They were amazing, man. I have like a really bad sweet tooth, just to give you as a context to this. And I never used to have to watch what I was eating because I was in high school training to play sports in college. I had a bad injury when I was a senior. So I, didn't end up playing, but we were at the hospital the other day and Raham and Soraya bought some donuts from Dunkin' Donuts. And I ate a glazed donut that they bought. And I like remembered that there was a point in my life where I used to eat like regularly for breakfast, half a dozen glazed donuts and like almost half a gallon of milk. But I was just fine because I was like working out 3 times a day and doing whatever else. It didn't even faze me. I cannot do that now. Right. So what you want to be able to see is like your relation to food and what's happening. So in this Ramadan, somebody had made these things for the bake sale and they made me a box of it myself. I hadn't been eating so much or sleeping so much. I took a bite of one. It was amazing. The next day, I felt like I was holding like tons of weights the whole day, super exhausted, super tired. And so I said to Mira, I was like, hey, I can't eat sugar in Ramadan anymore, right? It's just going to mess me up. So that Ramadan, I didn't eat any sugar. And then the next year I said to her, let's just stop eating it. And she was like, why do I have to do this? And I was like, because you work here and I'm not doing it by myself. And so we both cut out like processed sugars and it created such like headaches in my head. I'd smell sugar and I would get so angry at people. Like I was in such a bad mood because I was craving it so much. And it took a while, but when I cut it out initially, after like a few weeks, my body started to like detox from it. A few months, like foods that I used to not like eating before that were very healthy and not processed, they started to taste amazing to me now. And then after like the first year, I remember I ate a piece of like chocolate. I was really sad by this. I wasn't happy, right? I'll give you another story. My mom and my wife went to Costco once, and my wife and my mom were buying all kinds of stuff. And my mother said to the Costco person, where is your Reese's peanut butter cups? And she went and bought large economy-sized boxes of this. She said to the person, I need this for my son. And the woman said to my mom, oh, that's so nice. Your son is going to really love this. How old is he? She was like, my son is 34 years old. Right? And the guy was like, what? you know? So I was like, yeah, what can I do? I ate it after not eating it for a year. I took a bite of one. It tasted like so bitter in my mouth. It was so gross. In COVID, I got to a place though where, like, probably like a lot of you, I was sitting a lot. I injured my neck. I was like not conscious. There wasn't mindfulness of what I was putting in my body. And slowly it was just like regular, like anything, sugars, like sweets, whatever else. I got to the heaviest I've ever been in my life, like substantially. To give you a standpoint, I have lost in the last, I think, 5 months, 14 pounds. And I want to lose another at least like 15 to 20 to get back to where I was at one point. Right. And a lot of that built up for me just throwing this stuff in my body and not thinking about it so well, but it impacts now other things. That initial detox, though, like was throwing my mind out and me reflecting on, well, what does this do to me? And how am I paying attention to it? You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So you start to look at like specific things, like what works for you, what's good for you, and how do you kind of compensate? And I think fasting can be like a great opening to a lot of those conversations. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? Any comments on any of this? Yeah.
What's the Reese's peanut butter cup expired?
No, man. I love Reese's peanut butter cup. I love peanut butter. So I started eating the biha food when I was 12 years old, right? I used to eat, I never ate pork growing up. I've never drank alcohol or smoked anything, right? But like I used to eat like Burger King, McDonald's. I'm not saying to anybody who adopts that as opinion, it's a valid opinion, right? That people eat, non the biha meat. But I started to eat it when I was 12 only, the biha food. And because I played football in high school, I don't know if any of you played football or anything relevant. Did you nod your head? You played football? No? Did any of you guys play football in high school? Yeah. So football is like a very white Christian sport in the United States. And I used to go to a lot of football camps, and it was mostly run by like white Christian, and everything had pork in it. It didn't even make any sense, right? Like literally everything had pork in it, right? And then when I started eating the biha, there was even less that I could eat. So I go to these camps, and I would take raw pasta noodles and eat them with ketchup. And I'd eat a lot of peanut butter sandwiches because that's all I could eat that was not like pork based. Or then when I started eating the biha only, there was no other alternatives, right? So I built like a deep relationship with peanut butter and with pasta as a result of this. And it was something that like, I like love. And so Reese's peanut butter cups, man, I don't know who I told. Did I tell you this? Right? You ate it, right?
Yeah.
There's a crepe on McDougal. Oh my God. It's at the creperie. It's like a Reese's peanut butter something or other thing. It is like Jannah in your mouth. It is so freaking good, right? Huh?
You try to hide it from your kids?
No, I made my kids start to eat it, so then I had an excuse to order it for myself. I was like, "Oh, guys, you want a crepe?" I'm like, "No, Baba, we're tired." I'm like, "No, let's just order it." Right? And then we order like 2 or 3 of them. But no, it's great parenting. I think you look at stuff that's fair trade, right? You go to like support local farmers markets if you can, right? I think cutting out like a lot of like process type stuff, or if you need to do it, like do it in settings that make sense. You know what I mean? And reading up and educating, because from a marketing standpoint, people like just throw words on things that don't really mean anything, right? Like at my butchery, we used to follow industry standard, and we'd call like our chicken all natural chicken, or like our turkeys, right? We sell turkeys around this time of the year, and you can look at like previous years and we'd say, buy our all natural turkey. And I said to one of my partners one day, I was like, man, what is all natural turkey? Like, what part of it is not natural? What does this mean? Right? But people don't think because there's not mindfulness to it. you know. And you can read up on like, where do people, what do they support, right? Where does like their revenues go to? How do they treat their employees? Like Costco, for example, is an amazing institution. Its founding was based off of a revenue model that at a base provided a minimum wage of $20 an hour for employees. And people said, like, why? Because minimum wage in some parts of the country is like $7, right? And they're saying we're paying everybody 20 right from the get-go. And people would say you won't succeed, this and that, because they're thinking about the bottom line. But these guys not only like do well, they do crazy well. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and. You know what I mean? And you start looking at this, in a way that is not paranoid, but you're thinking about where is it coming from. I try to do this with my kids, and sometimes I talk to my kids and they look at me and they're like, what are you even talking about? Right. So like one day I made eggs for my kids and I said to them, where do the eggs come from? Right. And they're like, a chicken, Baba. Right. I was like, no, like, smart ass, where did the egg come from? Right. It didn't just end on your plate. Where is it coming from? And to really think, yes, it came from a chicken, but how many different hands had to move? How many different people had to be put into motion so that one egg got onto your plate, right? From the grocery store, from, the farms, the trucks, the farmers, like the feed, like all of these things. Arguably thousands of people moved for that one egg to get there, right? And mindfulness, consciousness becomes the root of all of it. So you're like, wow, subhanAllah, like how many people did Allah put into motion just so I could eat the thing that I want to eat, let alone just being able to eat? And like guilt becomes a really crazy factor sometimes in an unhealthy way, right? I've been to refugee camps where literally people eat the same rice 3 meals a day for like months on end. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go and eat good things. That's not the idea. But the idea is to have a recognition for yourself of like, where is it coming from? How did I get it? How do I truly like appreciate the one who provided this to me and utilize like with a deep sense of presence, an understanding of like, what am I doing to this body that God has given me as the vessel for my soul in a way that I'm not like living just in this moment, but I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of like eternal existence. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Yeah. And when you start to now become more conscious of it, the intention is not for vanity, right? Like my exercise is not for vanity, it's for health reasons. I want to enjoy like running around with my kids for the times that I'm going to be strong enough to do that, inshallah, right? I want to be in a place where like I serve a young community that is huge in number, 10,000 people, but I don't want like my body to be the reason as to why I can't go and raise money for survivors or build shelters and clinics and whatever else, or if somebody needs something that like I'm too tired or sick to be able to be there for them, right? You want to enjoy like the time you spend with others. So you start to think about these things. I heard a sheikh give a really great analogy of the relationship of a prophet to a people, to a doctor and student, patients. He said most people go to their doctor, the doctor tells them, don't do this, don't do that, and they just don't listen. And they'll speak about like, this is what's going to happen if you don't do this. This is what's going to happen if you don't do that, right? You can think about it with dentists. How many of us actually listen to what our dentists say about like our teeth and what goes into it and cavities and whatever else? Then you get to a place where you get more and more and more. And the doctor eventually says like, this is how you're going to die, right? This is what your heart is going to go through, the clogged arteries. And then the person gets annoyed with the doctor and says like, you're not a good doctor. Why are you telling me this thing? It's like, well, I just didn't tell you. I told you from before, right? It's built into our routine, and there's simple practices that are universal that if you can do these, you'll start to see like the benefit from it. So try to fast if you can, and try to create opportunities to come together, right? Where you can break fast. You can take people to dining halls, like feed them like for their fast breaking, right? Like at Tandon, someone was telling me that these guys just bought like a bunch of kebabs from home and gave it to everybody to break their fast on. That's great. There's barakah in it. Even if you have a bite of a kebab, there's blessing in it. You're sharing it with people. You know what I mean? You don't need anybody's permission. You don't have to be giving the khutbah to like tell people, hey, come and eat with us, right? You just break down barriers that are within and say like the gathering is more blessed as we're doing this. And you start to think about it on these other days and things. If you have fast to make up, you can like double an intention on it, right? So if you have a fast to make up and you also do that on like a Monday and a Thursday or one of the white days or every other day or whatever it is, that's fine. Like you get reward in our tradition for every intention within a singular action. Does that make sense? Right? So you can do one act with multiple intentions behind it.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.